Buckle up, because today we're diving into a period in history that's got it all: intrigue, rebellion, and massive power shifts. 1857 in India and everything that came after. You know those moments when, like, everything changes?
Yeah.
That's what we're going to unpack today.
It's a fascinating case study of how policies impact people and how those people then, well, push back against systems that just don't work for them anymore. We'll see how discontent, can simmer and then just boil over into widespread rebellion and the lasting consequences that has.
We're going to meet some incredible people along the way, too. Kings, queens, soldiers, religious leaders, all playing their part in this really dramatic story. Let's set the stage first. Mid-18th century India. What we see is the power of the Indian rulers, the Nawabs and the Rajas, beginning to decline. And the East India Company is right there. Their influence is growing.
It's important to realize this wasn't a sudden takeover. It was gradual. This process of restrictions being imposed, armies being disbanded, the rulers losing their revenue, their territory, bit by bit. Imagine the frustration, the resentment this caused. These were people used to authority, to respect, and suddenly they're being sidelined by, well, a foreign power.
It's like someone slowly taking over your house, one room at a time.
Yeah.
And you can see it happening, but you just feel powerless. We see examples of this. Rani Lakshmibai of Jhansi, she fought so hard to have her adopted son recognized as her heir. And then there's Nana Sahib. He kept pleading with the company for his father's pension. These weren't unreasonable requests, right?
No, not at all. But the company, with their military might, they felt very confident, basically ignored these pleas. A perfect example of this growing dominance, it's the annexation of Awadh, 1856. The company used misgovernance as their excuse, but it's clear they were simply expanding their control.
It's like they were testing the limits, seeing how far they could push. And get this, they even started making plans to end the Mughal dynasty. Can you believe that? Taking the Mughal king's name off their coins and scheming to move his whole family out of the Red Fort after his death. Talk about a power move.
What's fascinating here, the company wasn't content with just political control. They were targeting the symbols of Indian power. Bahadur Shah Zafar, the last Mughal emperor, demoted, reduced to a prince in their eyes.
It really shows you those shifting power dynamics, don't you think? The company is flexing its muscles, asserting its dominance, while Indian rulers are left feeling, well, increasingly marginalized. What strikes you of this whole power shift and the company's tactics?
I think what stands out to me is how calculated it was. They weren't just reacting, it was a strategy. Dismantle the existing power structures, replace them with their own. This is a pattern we see throughout history. Empires using force and manipulation to expand their control.
It's like a game of chess, They're moving their pieces, anticipating the opponent's moves, aiming for that checkmate. But the thing about chess is, even the most powerful pieces can be vulnerable if you don't see the threats coming. And in this case, maybe the company underestimated the simmering resentment that was building just beneath the surface.
Exactly. They were so focused on the big picture, on controlling the rulers and reshaping the political landscape, they missed something crucial: the growing discontent among the masses. And that brings us to the people themselves. Because this discontent wasn't just in the palaces, it was bubbling up in the countryside, among the peasants, and among the sepoys, the Indian soldiers in the company's army.
Okay, so we've got these two groups, peasants and sepoys, both facing their own challenges. Sounds like things were getting pretty tough.
Oh, absolutely. For the peasants, it was the burden of high taxes, the company's revenue collection so rigid, and the constant cycle of debt to moneylenders. They were losing their land, their livelihood, their entire way of life. Imagine that. Your family farm, the land your ancestors worked for generations, gone because you can't pay a tax.
Wow. It's hard to imagine that kind of loss. And the sepoys, what was their experience like? Serving in the army, but also having their own set of grievances.
Right. Low pay, poor conditions. And these new rules that often clash with their religious beliefs. Imagine being told you have to serve overseas, knowing that many believed crossing the sea meant losing your caste, your religion. It was a dilemma.
Like being trapped between a rock and a hard place. Serve and risk your spiritual well-being, or refuse and face the consequences. And their refusal to go to Burma by sea in 1824, that really shows how deeply held these beliefs were.
Absolutely. And don't forget, many sepoys came from peasant families. So the anger in the countryside, it resonated with them. This shared sense of grievance, like the company was exploiting everyone.
Two groups, facing very different challenges, but united in their dissatisfaction. What fueled this mounting tension, this feeling that something had to change?
Well, we have to understand that while the company was asserting its control, squeezing the peasantry, they were also trying to, well, modernize Indian society. A series of reforms that, while maybe well-intentioned by some, were seen by many Indians as an attack on their religion, their customs, their traditions.
Things like banning sati, encouraging widow remarriage,
Yeah.
the push for English language education, more freedom for Christian missionaries.
Exactly. These reforms, often implemented with this, well, sense of cultural superiority, further alienated many Indians. The 1850 law allowing Christian converts to inherit ancestral property, that really fueled the fear, an attempt to undermine traditional family structures.
It's that tension, the colonizer wanting to impose their own values and the colonized resisting. It seems like the company was playing a dangerous game, pushing for change on all these fronts but not really grasping the consequences.
A dangerous game indeed, walking a tightrope, trying to maintain control while pushing for changes that many Indians found deeply unsettling. It was a powder keg, just waiting for a spark.
And that spark, as we'll see, came in a form you might not expect. A rifle cartridge. But we'll delve into that fascinating turn of events after a quick break.
It's amazing, isn't it, how something so small, a rifle cartridge, could trigger such a massive upheaval. But that's what happened. 1857.
Those new cartridges, the rumors that they were greased with, well, cow and pig fat. It's hard to believe something like that could set off a rebellion.
It might seem trivial now, but back then it was a direct attack on people's religious beliefs. The cow, sacred to Hindus, the pig, unclean to Muslims, and these soldiers, they had to bite those cartridges open. Imagine that, seen as deliberate defilement.
Like the company had no idea about the culture, the religion, the sensitivities of their own soldiers. A shocking oversight.
It was. And the consequences, devastating. Mangal Pandey, the sepoy who attacked his officers over these cartridges, he became a symbol, a rallying cry.
Mangal Pandey, his act of defiance, captured the public imagination. He became a symbol of that growing anger, the resentment towards the company.
Absolutely. And then the mutiny at Meerut. Imprisoned soldiers freed, British officers killed. That was the turning point. It was no longer a localized incident. It was spreading fast.
From Meerut to Delhi, Kanpur, Lucknow, Kansi, it's incredible how quickly it spread. What started as a mutiny, it transformed into a popular uprising. The whole country, it seemed, was ready to fight back.
It wasn't just about soldiers anymore. People from all walks of life. Peasants, zamindars, local chiefs, they all joined in, united against the company.
Like the cartridges, they provided that common enemy, a focal point for all the anger, the frustration. What made that happen? What turned a mutiny into a full-blown rebellion?
Well, Bahadur Shah Zafar, the last Mughal emperor, he decided to support the uprising. Think about that. It gave the rebellion legitimacy, a rallying point that resonated with so many.
That nostalgia for the Mughal era, the desire to see Indian rulers in power again, and the speed at which it spread, it's remarkable.
The company had created the perfect conditions for this. So much discontent, it was bound to explode. Leaders emerged. Nana Sahib, Burgess Kadur, Rani Lakshmibai, Tantia Tope. They galvanized the resistance.
They became symbols of defiance, of the fight for freedom. It must have been a chaotic time. How did the British respond? Were they caught off guard?
At first, yes. The scale, the intensity, it took them by surprise. But they regrouped. And they responded with force, reinforcements, stricter laws. They were determined to crush the rebellion.
That power imbalance. They had the resources, the military might.
And they used it. The rebels fought bravely, but they were outmatched. Delhi recaptured. Bahadur Shah Zafar imprisoned. Key rebel leaders defeated, killed. The British, they used military might, but also diplomacy, amnesty, rewards for those who submitted, dividing the resistance.
Divide and conquer. Classic tactic. So what happened after the rebellion? Did things go back to the way they were?
Not at all. 1857, it was a turning point. The British had to rethink everything, their whole approach to ruling India. They couldn't just go back to business as usual. It had exposed the fragility of their control. They needed to make changes, big changes.
A wake-up call. A moment of reckoning. What kind of changes did they make?
One of the biggest, the transfer of power. From the East India Company to the British Crown. a move towards more direct rule.
Like they were saying, we're in charge now. Did they do anything to appease the Indian population?
They did. They assured Indian rulers no more annexations, trying to reduce anxiety. They also allowed rulers to pass on their kingdoms to their heirs, including adopted sons.
Trying to find a balance.
Yeah.
Offering concessions, but still maintaining control.
Exactly. They had to find a way to rule more effectively, prevent another uprising, another key change, the army. They reduced the number of Indian soldiers, increased European troops.
I can imagine that was out of distrust, fear that Indian soldiers couldn't be trusted.
The Sepoy Mutiny, it shook them. And their recruitment, it shifted. Instead of Awadh, Bihar, central India, they started recruiting more Gurkhas, Sikhs, Pathans.
A more loyal fighting force, one
Yeah.
that wouldn't turn against them. Were there other changes?
One of the most important, their approach to social and religious matters, it became more cautious, more pragmatic. They realized those attempts to reform Indian society, they backfired. They started emphasizing respect for religious practices, guaranteeing the rights of landowners.
That imposing their own values wasn't working. They had to adapt, find a way to rule that acknowledged, that respected Indian society.
The uprising, it was a harsh lesson. They had to reevaluate everything. And while they maintained control, the events of 1857, they changed the relationship between India and Britain forever.
The rebellion, it was crushed, but its impact, undeniable. It forced them to see the flaws, to make changes, and it planted the seeds of nationalism, the desire for self-rule.
And that brings us to the legacy of 1857. The uprising, suppressed but not forgotten. A symbol of resistance. A reminder that even the most powerful empires can be challenged.
A powerful story. Courage, tragedy, and that desire for freedom. But we've only scratched the surface. We'll delve deeper into those long-term consequences, the lasting legacy, after a short break. It really makes you think, how one event, 1857, could have such a ripple effect on the future of India, almost like a line in the sand, before and after.
That's a good way to think about it. It really changed things between India and Britain, not just about who was in control anymore.
But like identity. Who
Yeah.
gets to decide, India's story, past, present, future? And it seems like the British were, pretty aware of that. They didn't just change their policies. They tried to control how people saw the uprising, too.
Absolutely. They wanted it to be seen as a mutiny, just some disgruntled soldiers, not this national struggle. They downplayed the civilian leaders. They focused on the violence, even tried to erase people like Rani Lakshmi from memory.
History is written by the victors, right? They get to control the story. But even with all that effort, the memory of the uprising, it didn't disappear.
No, the stories, they were passed down generation to generation, part of their shared memory. And as India got closer to independence, the events of 1857, they became a source of inspiration.
So even though it was crushed, it planted the seeds for independence. What a legacy. What do you think the long-term consequences? How did it shape India?
The impact was huge. Politically, socially, culturally, nationalism, demands for self-rule, new political organizations formed, and a sense of unity. It transcended, those religious and regional divides.
So not just about pushing back against British rule, but creating this new Indian identity. It's incredible how much one event could change.
It really is. Shows the power of collective action, people coming together to challenge those in power. 1857 may not have been independence, not right then, but it set the stage for it.
It's really something. A few sepoys, and then this whole movement that leads to a nation. It shows that even when the odds are stacked against you, that desire for freedom, it can't be completely erased.
And the story is still relevant today. It reminds us that history, it's not just dates and names in a textbook. It's alive. It shapes our world. We have to learn from it, understand it, and use that knowledge to build something better.
It's been amazing exploring this turning point in Indian history. We've seen how those small events can trigger something huge, the struggles for power, shaping nations, and how people, they always want freedom.
1857, a reminder that history, it matters. It's up to us to learn from it. And to understand how those echoes of the past, they're still shaping our world today.
And on that note, we'll leave you with something to think about. What if something similar happened today? What would that resistance look like? What issues would spark that kind of defiance? That's something we're thinking about as we navigate our own complex times. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep into history.